Well, it's really a pleasure to be here today. I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday. The talks looked great yesterday, and I just couldn't come yesterday. But great to be here today. Nice day outside. More interesting day inside, perhaps, for at least a few hours for all of us who prefer being outside on most nice days. Anyway, today we're going to talk about something that is not particularly Long Island. We're going to talk about something that is a lot more universal. And that is, have you ever wondered what animals think and feel? That's what we will talk about. And we're going to start with a blank slide, because I went backwards. There we go. We're going to start with a question that many of you have asked yourselves. And that question is, does my dog really love me, or does she just want a treat? Of course, it's really easy to see that your dog really loves you. Right? That's easy to see, right? But can we really tell what's going on in those furry little heads? And yet it's obvious that something is going on. It's also obvious that this clicker doesn't work very well. Oh, there we go. Wait, hang on. Something is going on. And why is the question always, do they love us? Why is it always about us? Why are we such narcissists that the only thing we care about life on Earth is whether it loves us? So I needed a different question. And my question became, who are you? There are capacities of the human mind. The question is, are these capacities only of the human mind? What's going on in these other great brains? Is there a way to find a route in? People have said, no, absolutely not. You can only watch what they do. But I think that there are some very good ways in. You can look at their brains, you can consider evolution, and you can watch what they do. Nervous systems began in jellyfish. And then nervous systems gave rise to chordates, and chordates gave rise to vertebrates, and vertebrates came out of the ocean, and they built buildings and auditoriums, and here we all are. But it's still true that a nerve cell is a nerve cell. And a nerve cell is basically identical, whether it's in a crayfish or a bird or a human being. So what are the implications for the mental experience of crayfish? Well, it turns out that if you give a crayfish a lot of little electrical shocks, it will stop trying to come out and explore, it will stop eating, and it will act as though it has anxiety disorder. Does that mean anything? Well, if you give a crayfish the exact same drug that is used to treat anxiety disorder in humans, it relaxes and it comes back out and starts exploring again. How do we respond to the possibility of crayfish anxiety? Mostly we boil them. Octopuses use tools as well as most apes, and they recognize different human faces. How do we celebrate the ape-like intelligence of octopuses? Mostly we boil them. Groupers sometimes chase a fish into a crevice, and if they do that, they sometimes go to where they know a moray eel is sleeping, and they have a way to signal the moray eel that says, "Follow me." The moray eel knows that signal and often will follow. When it gets to where the grouper knows the fish is hiding, the grouper will signal, "The fish is in here." The moray will go in. Sometimes it will catch the fish. Sometimes the fish will bolt, and the grouper will get it. This is an ancient partnership that has probably been going on for millions of years. We've only known about it for about 10 years. And when I say we, I mean the 17 people who have read that paper. How do we celebrate this ancient, extremely unusual interspecies partnership? What would you guess? Fried. So a pattern is emerging, and it says a lot more about our mental abilities than it does about theirs. Sea otters teach. Teaching is when you stop doing what you are doing to show your companion or your child what to do. That's teaching. Chimpanzees do not teach. Sea otters teach, and sea otters use tools. Killer whales teach, and killer whales share almost all the food they catch with one another. If you look at brains and you consider evolution, what you see is that how evolution works is when it wants to make something new, it takes the parts that are already in stock off the shelf, and it fabricates a new twist on those. So if you compare a mouse brain with a human brain, what you basically see is that we have a very elaborated mouse brain. If you compare a chimpanzee brain and a human brain, what you see is that we basically have just a big chimpanzee brain. It's a very good thing for us that our brain is bigger because we're also the most insecure ape. But uh-oh, there's a dolphin. A bigger, more complicated brain. What is it doing with that brain? Maybe it's thinking a lot, maybe it's just processing sonar. Can't quite tell by looking. So maybe you're saying to yourself, well, we can see brains, but we can't see minds. And I would say, yes, that's exactly true. However, you can see the mind's workings in the logic of behaviors. What I mean by the logic of behaviors is that we make sense of what they're doing in exactly the same way that they make sense of it. If you look at these elephants, it's very obvious that they're relaxed. It's also very obvious that they've done something quite sensible. They've decided to find a patch of shade in a grove of palms. They've let their babies go to sleep. And while they doze, facing different directions and touching, they're not quite asleep because the world is a dangerous place. And they make sense of that exactly as we make sense of that. Because on the same plains, under the arc of the same sun, listening to the whoops and roars of the same dangers, we became who we are and they became who they are. We've been neighbors for a very, very long time. But they've been doing a better job of watching us. No one would say these elephants look relaxed. They look concerned, and they are. Something's up. What might be up? It turns out that if you record the voices of tourists talking, and you record the voices of herders talking, and you play back those recordings from the same speaker hidden in the same bushes, elephants ignore the sounds of the tourists talking because tourists never bother them. But if they hear the sounds of herders, they bunch up and run away because herders carry spears and they often hurt elephants in confrontations at waterholes. Elephants know not only that there are various kinds of animals and humans, they know that there are different kinds of humans, and they know that some of them are okay and some are dangerous. We all have basically the same imperatives. Stay alive, find food, keep our babies alive. We have essentially the exact same skeleton, we have the same organs, we have basically the same nervous system. Inside that nervous system, the same hormones and brain chemicals that create mood and motivation in humans are identical to them. Whether they are outfitted for hiking or for diving, we are essentially identical, and we are all kin under the skin. And so we recognize helping when help is needed. We see curiosity, especially in the young. We see the deep bonds of family affection. We understand courtship when we see courtship. We know dancing when we see dancing. And then we do something odd. We say, are they even conscious? That strikes me as quite a strange question. What is consciousness? When you have general anesthesia, you are rendered unconscious. That means you're disconnected from any information coming in from your senses. If you are connected to sensory information and you're having a sensory experience, you are conscious. They have eyes that see, ears that hear, noses that smell. They interact with one another. It's very obvious that they're conscious. How could this even still be a question? Somebody I know who is a bit more senior than I, he was a student in the grand old days of behavior, when behavior was first becoming a science. He actually studied with Tinbergen, and he told me that he was taught that animals are capable of detection, not perception. In other words, everything except human beings are just motion sensors. Knowing what we know about evolution, and if evolution is really the basic concept of life, how would you come up with an idea that we are the only ones who are conscious when we're surrounded by obvious consciousness all over the place? Yes. Okay. End of discussion. So some people then concede, okay, they're conscious, but there are special things that make us human. And this is like a Mad Libs line. If you read a lot about behavior and perception, you constantly run into a line that says blank makes us human. One of the things is empathy. People claim empathy makes us human. Well, empathy happens to be one of the oldest things in the world that is shared by basically every single animal that lives in groups. Empathy is the ability of a mind to match the mood of the other minds around it. So if you walk into a room and you see your friends and they're all happy, it makes you feel like you're in a better mood. If you walk in and everybody is somber and something is obviously wrong, it dampens your mood. That is empathy. If you live in a group and the group decides to hurry, you better hurry. That's empathy. If all of your companions suddenly startle and fly away, it doesn't pay for you to stand there on the beach saying, oh, I wonder why everybody just left. Because in evolution, that kind of impulse will be chosen out. The peregrine will get you. Like everything in life, empathy is on a sliding scale. You can make little categories. I've made 3 categories in my mind. I call them basic empathy, which is feeling with another, mood matching, very basic mood matching. Then there's sympathy, feeling for another, a little bit more detached. I'm sorry to hear that your grandmother has just passed away. You don't have the same level of grief, but you understand the distress of another. And then there is what I call compassion, which is the motivation to actually act on your empathy and do something. Not only is empathy not the thing that makes humans humans, but human empathy is far from perfect. We take other empathic animals, and with no empathy for them, we round them up and we kill them and we eat them. And maybe you're saying, well, that's just predation. That's different. Okay, maybe it's just different. We're not so good to each other either. And one hardly needs to make that point. It's very obvious that that's unfortunately a true fact about us. And yet people who know only one word about animal behavior, people who know almost nothing about animal behavior, seem to know that this is a bad word, this awkward word. They know it, and they will tell you can't do it. Science writers tell you all the time you can't do it. Cannot attribute human thoughts and emotions to other animals. But I think that that's silly. An animal that seems scared is probably scared. An animal that looks relaxed is probably relaxed. If your dog seems happy, it's because it's a happy dog. It's just not scientific to say they're hungry when they're hunting and they're tired when their tongues are hanging out, and then when they're having fun and playing with their families and their babies, say, we don't have any way of knowing if they're even capable of having a mental experience. That is not scientific. A little while ago, I was being interviewed about this subject, and the reporter said, okay, you're saying all these things, but how do you really know that other species can think and can feel? And I thought, well, God, I've read hundreds of papers. Let me think, what's the best paper that I read that I can cite this study and convince this reporter that this is true? And then I realized, oh, wait a second, the answer is lying right here on the rug. When my little pup comes off the carpet and comes over to me, and she doesn't come off the carpet and go over to the sofa and stand there staring. She comes over to me, and she rolls on her back. She has had a thought, and the thought is, I'd like my belly rubbed. And I know I can go over to him because I know we're family. I know I can absolutely trust him, and I know that if I turn upside down, he will understand what I'm asking for. He knows how to get the job done, and he knows how to make it feel good. She has thought and she has felt, and I don't think it's really that much more complicated. When we see wild animals, we tend to see them as species, and we say, oh, elephants, killer whales, wolves. That's not how they see it. They see it like this. This guy, these are all members of the L pod in the Pacific Northwest. This guy was 36 years old when I took this photograph. She's 42. They have known each other for decades. They know exactly who they are. When they're separated, they know how to find each other. They can recognize their voices. They know where they are. They know who their friends and family members are, their rivals, their dangers. They know where they are in their vast territory at all times. They have a life. Here is an adolescent male elephant named Philo. This is in Kenya, and this is Philo 4 days later. Humans are capable not only of experiencing grief, we are capable of creating an unbelievable amount of it. We want to carve their teeth. Why can't we wait for them to die? In Roman times, African elephants lived all the way from the Mediterranean to the Cape of Good Hope, except for the worst parts of the Sahara Desert. As recently as the 1980s, they had vast contiguous strongholds in Central and Eastern Africa. Now most of their habitat is in little splinters and shards, and their population is declining further and further. This is the geography of the greatest creature on land that we are driving to complete extinction. Of course, in our own country, we take much better care of the wildlife. In Yellowstone National Park, park rangers killed every last wolf, some of the last wolves south of the Canadian border in the 1920s. And then 60 years later, because the elk were out of control, they brought wolves back. And then people started going to Yellowstone specifically to see the wolves. And people spend tens of millions of dollars, it turns out, just to go see the wolves in Yellowstone. Renting the cars and staying in the lodges and having meals in the restaurant, all that great economic activity that we love to talk about. To see the world's most visible, most accessible wolves. And the most visible of those was a pack that lived in the Lamar Valley, near the northern tier of the park. And they were, in fact, quite easy to see. They were a very, very stable family. A pack is just a family. A pack usually has 2 breeding adults and the offspring of 2 or 3 years. And as the offspring start to become adolescents, they leave. Really, a wolf pack is a nuclear family, very, very similar to ours. So then one day at the end of 2012, Congress highlighted the word wolf and hit the delete key on the Endangered Species Act list. So wolves were now suddenly off the Endangered Species Act, and when this family walked through the imaginary line of the eastern boundary of Yellowstone National Park, people there were more or less waiting for them and almost immediately shot the adult female, who was the most famous wolf in history, probably, and the only animal that ever got an obituary in the New York Times, and an adult male who was the brother of the breeding male. Immediately, this very stable family descended into sibling rivalry. This wolf on the bottom who was getting beat up, she was the most precocious of all of the offspring in that pack. She was the one most like her mother, and she was the one who attracted the most attention from 2 new males who came in around the family after those 2 adults were shot, and the alpha male went off probably looking for them. So they didn't like it, and they acted jealous, and they beat her up a lot, and I saw her getting kicked out over a period of several days. Those are 2 of her sisters escorting her out. She tried to come back. They wouldn't let her back. That's the father, the alpha male. He went wandering around trying to look probably for his mate and his brother. Going into winter, those 2 wolves lost their family, their hunting support, and their territory where they could even live and hunt. She wound up outside the park and was shot at somebody's chicken coop, starving. If I had to bet who had no prospects of surviving, I would have bet him. He lost everything, and yet 3 years later he's still alive. He found another mate. Finally, 3 years later they had pups, and he's got a new territory. He managed to figure out a way to survive. The point being, these creatures have lives. Their lives have trajectories, and sometimes unexpected things that happen, like a family member suddenly dying, changes the arc of your entire lifetime and your relationships within your own family. We cause them so much pain, and a strange thing to me is why they hurt us so little. This killer whale had just finished tearing apart part of a gray whale that he and his companions had killed. And yet those people in that boat had absolutely nothing to fear because free-living killer whales have never hurt anybody. This whale, T20, had just ripped apart a seal that he and 2 companions had killed while I was watching. That seal weighed about as much as each of the people in that boat, and yet those people have absolutely nothing to fear because for some strange reason, these whales kill seals and they don't kill people. Why is it that we can trust them around our toddlers? Why is it that there are 2 well-documented stories with 2 different researchers in 2 different countries who were following a pod of killer whales when suddenly a thick fog descended on them? They lost the whales, and then the whales came back, got in front of the boat. The researchers decided, well, let's follow the whales, and in one of the cases, the whales took them, in both cases, the whales took them home. In one of the cases, the whales took them 15 miles through the fog, and when the fog suddenly burst open, the researcher's house was right there on the shoreline, and the whales turned around and left. In the Bahamas, there's a researcher named Denise Herzing, and she studies spotted dolphins, and she knows those dolphins as well as anybody knows any animals that they study. She knows them as individuals. She knows who is whose offspring, who is the parents, and they know her. They recognize the boat. They recognize the people and the voices. And when she shows up, she usually stays for about 3 weeks, and there's a big greeting. They greet and recognize everybody, and it's all happy, except that one time she showed up, and the dolphins wouldn't come near the boat. And they thought, this is really strange. What is going on with these dolphins? And suddenly, somebody came out and announced that one of the people on board had just died during a nap in his bunk. Now, how in the world could the dolphins know that one of the human hearts had just stopped? And why would they care? And why would that spook them? So they, of course, immediately left. The dolphins followed at a distance for a while and then dropped away. And when the boat came back a few days later, they greeted the boat and were all happy as usual. I have no idea what these things mean or how to explain them, but I do know that one of the things that it shows is that there are things going on in these other minds that share the world with us that our minds have never even considered the possibility of. In an aquarium in South Africa, there was a baby dolphin named Dolly, and she was so little she was still nursing. And one day, one of the keepers was on a break, and he was outside the pool looking through the window, smoking a cigarette, and this little baby dolphin came over to the window and was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and she went over to her mother and nursed, and then she came back to the window and released a cloud of milk that enveloped her head like a cloud of smoke. Somehow, a baby dolphin had the idea, I'm going to go use milk to represent whatever this guy is doing. When we use one thing to represent something else, we call that art. The things that make us human are not the things we think make us human, and not the things we like to think make us human. What I think makes us human is not that we do anything particularly different, but that what we do to the extreme. We are the animal of extremes. We are the most creative and the most destructive, the most compassionate and the cruelest animal that has ever existed. And we are all of those things together. But love is not the thing that makes us human. We're not the only creatures who care for each other. We are not the only creatures who care for our children. Albatrosses nest on the remotest islands in the world. This is Laysan Island, farther from any continent than any other island in the world, except 2 other islands nearby. Okay, basically, it's in the middle of the biggest ocean in the world, farther from people than anything is, and that's what it looks like. We have no idea that they are there. They certainly know about us. There is an albatross named Wisdom who is about 65 years old. Probably everybody here knows about this bird, the oldest known wild bird. That bird fledged into an ocean that contained basically no plastic. She is still alive. Nowadays, every albatross, after flying 6,000 or 8,000 miles to bring back one meal for a chick, feeds that chick plastic. And they're all full of it. This is an albatross that was about to fledge, about 6 months old. It died, and it was packed with red cigarette lighters. This is not the relationship we are supposed to have with the rest of the world. And yet, in the blink of an eye, after all these millions of years, this is the relationship that we do have with the rest of the world. And this is not just an idea or me saying it. This is pain and death for these creatures. Yet, when we welcome new human life into the world, we paint animals on the nursery walls. We don't paint cell phones. We don't paint pictures of our work cubicles. We paint animals. And I think without even realizing it, there is a message there that we are trying to convey. And the message is that we are not alone, that we have company here. Welcome to this beautiful living world. And every one of those animals in every painting of Noah's Ark, every one of those animals worth salvation. And remember that story, one human family is worth saving. Every one of the animals is worth saving. And yet every one of the animals worth saving in that story is in mortal trouble now, and their flood is us. So we started with a question, do they love us? And we're going to end by turning that question around and asking it a little bit better, which is, do we have what it takes in our minds to simply let them exist? Are we capable of that? Thanks a lot.
We have plenty of time for questions. And we may not even need any.
Yes.
Hi. Oh, this is actually the second time I've heard you speak, and it was wonderful, so thank you. And I just
I
wondered...
hope I was better this time.
You were both great both times. And I just wondered if you'd heard the story, last year it was, that there was a man who was doing a swim. I forget what body of water he was in, but as he was swimming, the boats that were following him got lost, and sharks came. And a school of dolphins actually came up and swam around him to protect him. And they stayed with him until the shark was actually gone, and he'd never had experience with these dolphins before. They just came up and protected him from the shark. And it actually turned out he was doing a swim for dolphin protection, and they didn't find that out until the end of the news story. But just going along with what you've said, I think if we pay attention, sometimes you can see those things in the world. So thank
Somehow
you very
they
much.
knew.
Yeah.
There are a lot of incredible stories about dolphins helping people that are really difficult to comprehend, and they're even difficult to dismiss. My own editor had an experience where he was in the ocean in a kayak, and he was starting to get into trouble, and the weather got really bad, and some dolphins showed up next to his kayak, and they stayed with him and sort of led him into the nearest inlet, and then they left. That's the story I'm personally closest to, because I heard that directly from him firsthand. Another person I know wrote about, she studies dolphins, her name is Maddalena Berzi, and she wrote about being with a group of dolphins she knew while they had corralled a school of fish against the shoreline, and they were starting to feed on these fish, and they suddenly disappeared seaward. And she thought, that's really weird. Why would these dolphins that have just created this feeding situation and just started feeding, why would they start swimming straight out into the ocean? So she followed them 3 miles, and they were surrounding a person who was unconscious, who had swum seaward trying to commit suicide. And they saved this girl. Now, that's just an unbelievable story, I think. And that to me is not like people say sometimes, oh, well, dolphins, if one of them gets into trouble, they try to push it to the surface, or they're accustomed to pushing their babies to the surface. If they see a swimmer thrashing, they just do the same thing. It's just a reflex. That doesn't sound like just a reflex. It sounds like there's a lot more going on. So as I say, some of these stories are really incredible and also really hard to dismiss. Yes?
We get barraged by all these YouTubes of animals, little videos of what the animals do, and I believe that it's really increasing the consciousness of people because there's so many amazing things that they put there. That cat that went after the dog.
That cat that's on the web?
Yeah, chased the dog away from the little boy. That's right. But this particular cat, a little dog went after the boy on a little tricycle and was biting him.
Yeah.
And the cat came flying out and chased the dog away. They later executed the dog, but this cat defended a family member.
The YouTube video thing is, the whole web video thing is really interesting because, never before have we had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people with cameras who can film anything they see. It used to be that, when I was a kid, there was basically no good wildlife filming. And then we grew up in an area where wildlife documentary making got excellent, but you had to have a crew in a place. Now everybody, wherever they are, can not only capture it, but can share it with the whole world. And I think it's making a big dent in that kind of firewall about what other animals do, how simplistic their lives have been assumed to be, and how rich and different their lives actually are.
Daniel Carpenter again. There's a very good video showing someone cutting a net away from a humpback whale. He's on a boat, freeing the whale. The whale is freed. swims away from the boat and breaches clear of the water 6 times in appreciation for
Yeah.
getting rescued.
You know,
How many people have seen that video?
that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
That story of that whale is not even the one I think is most impressive, but the one I think is most impressive, there's not a video of, and that was a story in the San Francisco Chronicle about a whale that was wrapped up in a whole line of crab traps and was really, really having a lot of trouble just staying at the surface and breathing, and these rescuers arrived. And when they got in the water, they thought, like, there's so much rope all around this whale, and the traps are hanging off, and they thought it might be dangerous if they start cutting. If the whale thrashes, it might wrap up the divers. And as soon as they got in the water, the whale just stayed completely motionless while they cut all of the rope off, and then the whale did not swim away. It swam in several circles around the divers, and then it went to each of them, and it sort of nudged the divers around in the water. And as the divers told the reporter, it was like being playful like a little puppy, except it was a 40-foot long puppy. And, you know, it seemed thankful. What other word would seem most appropriate for that situation? But as mind-blowing as the thing about whales are, or that video of the dolphin with the hook in its flipper, that somehow knows that if it shows the hook to a human diver, the diver will probably know what to do, and the divers do take the hook out. And I thought that was, wow, that's just so mind-blowing. You can see videos now of manta rays doing basically the same thing. Manta rays stuck with gill net all over them, coming up to divers and just being completely still while the divers cut them out and then circling around a few times. That, to me, is the most surprising thing along those lines that I know about.
I'm sure that everyone has seen Bear Family in Pool, where Mother Bear and 5 cubs invade the backyard in New Jersey, where there's a kiddie pool, and they're just having great fun.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. The crayfish I'm just wondering, I'm trying to ask a question that looks to the future, right? You presented on this. I know you've written a lot of different things. You know, the scientific community, and then there's people that just say, let's save them because we love them and they're cute. I mean, there's people on Long Island that want to kill mute swans, and there's people that love them, right? But in the future, the crayfish thing, we do a lot with chimpanzees in the lab. Like, we could hook up their brains, look at fMRIs. We can give antidepressant to a crayfish and watch how they respond differently to this regime of stimulus that we've planned and documented clinically, But can we really prove, like, scientifically, like what we did with the crayfish and chimps with our scientific equipment, with the scientific method? Do you think it's possible to put the proof, like with academia, behind some of the stuff that you showed and the stories that we're talking about in the future?
Yeah.
Do you think, like, we could move towards?
Well, I think I think the answer is kind of yes, because, in the course of my lifetime, what we've learned about brains and what we've learned about animal behavior is really, really a tremendous amount. So when people like Lorenz and Tinbergen said all we can do is watch what they do and describe that, we have no idea what's going on in their mind, that was 60 years ago. We've learned really, really a lot more since then. And some of the early attempts to test mental experience in the laboratory in a more scientific, more controlled way were very clumsy and very uninsightful. Some of them are completely absurd. And some of the ones more recently are very well designed and very insightful. And some of the scientists, if you ask laboratory scientists about, their what they consider to be their level of proof, many of them don't know wild animal behavior. They only know how animals act in laboratories because they've really only seen them in laboratories. The people who study wild animals have a very different sense of what they do and a very different standard of evidence. But let me just give you a couple of examples of how things have progressed. There's this, this idea, which has a name I don't like, called theory of mind. And one of the problems in this whole area is there's no standard definitions of things. So if you look for the definition of theory of mind, it's all over the place, like the theory of, like the definition of self-recognition is all over the place. But a good way to think of what theory of mind means is that it means basically and most cogently that you can understand that another individual can have an agenda different from yours and thoughts different from yours, okay? The first experiments on theory, well, the first thing about theory of mind that was said that only humans have that ability to understand that another individual can have a different thought than you have. And so they first tried to, quote, test this on chimpanzees, our closest living relative, or one of our closest living relatives. So here's what they literally did, and in my book there's the reference. You can look at the paper because it sounds like I'm making this up or simplifying it because it's so unbelievably idiotic. They took a chimpanzee in a laboratory enclosure, in a room, and they showed the chimpanzee a photo of a person having a problem and a photo of the solution to the person's problem. And the chimpanzee was supposed to pick the photo that solved the person's problem. Here are some of the photos. A guy appears to be shivering in a still photograph next to a heater. The heater's pilot light is out. It's a gas heater. The chimpanzee is supposed to pick a photograph of a lit wick to show that it understands the problem. Okay? Talk about like insightful research. Another photo, I'll just do one more photo in that series. Another photo was a person trying to listen to a phonograph record, but the phonograph is not plugged into the wall. The chimpanzee is supposed to choose the picture of the plug in the outlet. Thomas Jefferson would not know what the solution to that was. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, very recently, since a lot of other much more insightful setups have been done, they have shown, for instance, that, well, some animals appear to act as though they know that other animals have a different agenda. But then people are saying, well, maybe they're just wired to do one thing in the presence of animals and something else when they're alone. So that doesn't really prove it. So the thing that they did most recently about food caching in birds, where some birds, mostly like ravens and corvids, various corvids, have been shown they'll cache food if they're alone, and they won't cache food if there are others around. The surmise is, if they think they're being watched, that they know that somebody will see where they hid the food and they'll come and get it. People were saying, well, that's not good enough. You can't just guess that. So more recently, somebody just set up a thing where there's a raven here and a raven there, and there's a divider with a window that slides. And they simply showed that when the sliding window is open and one raven can know that the other raven can see it, it won't hide food. And when you slide the thing closed, it will hide food. So those are the ends of the spectrum of a completely idiotic experiment and a very insightful one that, in a very controlled way, pretty much nails it to probably most scientists' satisfaction, that the raven does understand what it means to be watched, knows that the other raven can have a different agenda, will want to steal its food, that kind of thing. Yes, Artie.
Carl, thank you. I just wanted to share a story about dolphins. We're hearing the other ones. This was Super Bowl Sunday, 1994.
The Miami Dolphins?
Yeah, right. Actually, there were two dolphins stuck in Flushing Bay near LaGuardia Airport. We moved them out, took 6 hours to get those dolphins out. They were stressed, and you can tell they were stressed right away before they got moved, and that's because of their breathing rate and their breathing behavior, so you could tell. The moment we got them past Execution Rock into deep water, both of them began to breach, to jump.
Wow.
It was incredible. I just thought maybe they were just, in deep water they can do that, but I think it was just kind of...
Exuberance.
Exactly.
I know when I get near LaGuardia Airport, my breathing rate goes up.
One more.
So if I can channel Timbergen for a moment here, the idea that we should assume that animals don't feel emotions, of course, as you said, comes from the tendency for us to go to excesses there and attribute all sorts of emotions to animals.
Right.
And I totally agree with you. As a longtime pet owner, as somebody who watches wildlife in the field, I have absolutely no trouble saying that animal's afraid, or those animals are being affectionate, or my dog loves me. I have no problem saying those things. But I am worried about the possibility that if we open that door back up again, that we're vulnerable to the same things that drove this push in the first place, that we'll go overboard in ascribing emotions and feelings as scientists. So I wonder if you'd like to address that possibility. Where can we draw some boundaries?
Well,
and
I don't
say
think you
what's
should
okay
ever
and
draw
what's
any
not?
boundaries. You can't be a scientist and draw boundaries. You can be a scientist and have evidence and have logic and that kind of thing. So it used to be that what we knew about animals, we knew from fables. We knew that foxes were clever and grasshoppers were lazy and that kind of thing. So you need to wipe the slate. So that's what Timbergen and Lorenz and a couple of those people, they just said, stop. We're going to really look at animals. So we're going to wipe the slate. And what they said was, you can't assume that they think or feel or have a mental experience. That's different than saying you must assume that they can't think, can't feel, and can't have a mental experience. Those two sentences are not equivalent. So it's important to assume nothing, but it's also really important to be open to possibilities. Otherwise, you're not a scientist if you're not open to possibilities. That's more in the realm of religion, really, where you have a dogma that says it's like this, you can't consider that. And the science of animal behavior became very dogmatic on this. So it went from we can't assume to you can't
say it.
you can't even ask the question.
Sure.
So Donald Griffin wrote a book called The Question of Animal Awareness. He was basically a genius. He finally figured out how bats have sonar. And he was not an upstart, he was a very senior guy. He wrote a book, The Question of Animal Awareness, and he was sort of like drummed to the edges of the whole profession for asking the question. And right around the time when this was a huge uproar, I heard that, I saw that he was going to be speaking at the IBM headquarters in Westchester County, and I was a college student at SUNY Purchase, just a few miles away. So I thought, wow, I'm going to go hear Donald Griffin give this talk. So I go to IBM headquarters, and Donald Griffin talks for an hour, basically defending the idea that animals seem to have consciousness and mental awareness. That was the title of the book, was The Question of Animal Awareness. So he's going on and on and on, just showing all this evidence, and defending this idea, and then he's done, and then it's time for questions. So now it's IBM headquarters, right? It's not a university. So a hand goes up, and this guy sort of hesitantly says, I don't understand. You just spent an hour telling us that animals are aware, but isn't it obvious?
Sure.
And I thought that was so funny. Because this person hadn't been steeped in the idea that you can't say they're aware, you can't even ask the question, it's out of the question. So can you make mistakes? You could make mistakes, yes, of course. But I don't think, insightful observers who actually watch animals, they don't really make mistakes. They don't say, oh, you see that squirrel? The squirrel is being so thoughtful, it must be trying to figure out where to go to graduate school. Like, nobody makes a mistake like that. Amateurs make mistakes all the time, but amateurs make mistakes about human behavior too. I mean, how many times has somebody misunderstood what you were thinking or what was important to you? I mean, we all have problems like that in all of our relationships all the time. It's just trying to be understood, trying to make ourselves understood. So we make mistakes, and I never mean to imply that anything anybody thinks about what's going on in the mind of a non-human is going to be correct. That would be absurd. But it's also, people don't know what's going on in the minds of other humans either. And what we've thought people from other cultures are capable or not capable of thinking. We've said, and we've always used this to suppress and oppress other people, right? We've said that Africans are not capable of love and have no sense of aesthetics and things like that. So why would you say shit like that? So you can do anything you want to them, right? And so we say, well, animals can't think or feel anything. That makes a lot of stuff very easy for us. And that's one of the reasons that it gets perpetuated. And it's one of the reasons that people are so eager to absorb that. And why there's this huge polarity between people who are so eager to say animals can't think or feel anything and don't even ask, they can't. And on the other hand, what you see partly by all these YouTube videos and some of the misinterpretation of them that's so obvious is that what I think is part of the misinterpretation is there are a lot of people who are like so alienated from the rest of humanity and so disappointed in us that they kind of want to think that there's something better out there and that other animals are more pure in their thoughts and in their empathy and in their willingness to help and that kind of thing. And, that's not strictly true either. But I don't, in strict answer to your question, I don't think it's scientific to draw lines. I think it's scientific to have an open mind to the evidence and try to be realistic about what the evidence does and doesn't say.
I think what you're suggesting is we apply Occam's razor here, which seems perfectly appropriate.
No, I don't like Occam's razor at all. I'm not suggesting that. I don't like that at all. I mean, if the simplest explanation was true, we wouldn't believe that there would be life on Earth, because life on Earth is not simple, and it doesn't strictly obey the second law of thermodynamics, except in this convoluted way. Complicated things can happen, and things can happen just because they happened. And evolution pushes things to be very complicated, not the simplest. If you want it, the simplest life should be that life will never evolve because that's too complicated. So I don't like that approach. What I'm just saying is just look at what makes sense, have an open mind, and ask if it makes sense or not. It makes sense to say an animal is scared. It doesn't make sense to say an animal is thinking about what it will do 3 years from now.
And that's how I would apply the razor, and that if it looks like it's doing this, and that's the simplest explanation, it's very similar to what I would be doing under those circumstances.
Yes, right, okay, yeah, well, I agree with that, yeah.
So then the problem is definitions, because if we're going to expect people to use those, to use that approach, then we have to agree on what we mean by love and what we mean by fear and what we mean
That's
by
very true. In my book, I tried to create definitions to all of these things to make it clear what I'm talking about. Because a lot of the argument is that people are actually having two separate discussions because they think it means one thing when they say it and the other person think it means something else when they say it. Anyway. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Carl.
All right. Thank you. I guess we're out of time. Thank you.